one of the things that I like to start off with people that are new to Acumatica and the platform is to say that when Acumatica was born, if you will, when they were founded in 2008, it was actually a platform company. One of the envisionments that the founders had, having come out of various other ERP businesses and endeavors, was that there were a lot of things that they realized that were just banes and ball and chains and for upgrades and all kinds of issues that most ERP platforms in that day and frankly still today have, because they don't consider customization and integration as a top priority, along with, like, say, security. Some of the ERPs, in fact, many of them that are out there, think of customization and integration as an afterthought. And you can tell that because of the way they have a very poor survivability rate when it comes to customizations through upgrades. However, when Acumatica started off, that was one of the key areas that they felt very strongly they needed to address, was how do we create a very high survivability rate of custom work as our customers go from version A to version B to version C. And they've done so, and they've accomplished it. And that was one of the draws when I was looking for something to do, being semi-retired. John Roscoe at the time, who was our CEO just as of a few weeks ago, we were very much partners at Microsoft working together. And that was one of the things when I would talk to the Chief Product Officer, Ali Yanni, that drew me to this company was over some of the other opportunities I had, was because I really liked the technology and the architected approach to making the platform extensible. And that's really the key thing to come away with today from the top line is Acumatica started off as a platform company with the complete intent of being customizable with very little artifacts having to be dealt with when you go through upgrades. And so that's something that I haven't seen in any ERP. I worked at Microsoft for almost 27 years, and the last several years I was the technical product manager for the Dynamics AX team, helping them move over to Azure, which is now where Dynamics 365 is. But that experience was just what I was talking about. Dynamics AX, or Axapta, when Navision bought them, the German company, the Navision being a Danish company, when they were acquired, they were using a proprietary language called X++, and you can look at many of the other products out there that are ERP published solutions, and they all have similar stories. They're vendor locked into something or proprietary in some area, and there was no need for that. But unfortunately, a lot of them got birthed that way. Well, Acumatica started off as a platform company, is the key thing to come away with today. It definitely served that purpose, because one of the first handful of customers they had in the first couple of years of existence were white label companies that wanted to take the platform and write their own solutions on top. And so MyYOB, which is $1 billion concern down in the Australian Southeast Asia area, runs their solution, which is labeled by MYOB, but it's an Acumatica platform-based solution. There's several others, but that's just one example of many where Acumatica was taken on as a platform company. Well, being from the ERP industry, they decided to go one step further, and that is, well, let's offer an ERP in the cloud too. Because at that time, in 2010, which is 12 years ago, that was novel. AWS had just started offering virtual machines in the cloud. And so, and Azure didn't even have them yet. So it was really a novel thing to think about. Let's offer ERP in the cloud, because Microsoft didn't get to that until 2019. So 9 years after that decision. So it's a very important to understand that Acumatica really was a platform company that is now selling an ERP solution on top of it. Is really the way to sum that up. So let's go ahead and go through some of the stuff that we can do here. First and foremost, let's spend a little time on what do we mean by xRP platform, and technically what does it provide, as well as business-wise, what does it provide? Well, first, business-wise, it provides all the solutions you see on the top tier here. So when we say general business edition or industry editions, what we're talking about are solutions in those various endeavors in business. So if you're talking accounting or chart of accounts or ARAP or CRM, time and expense, all those things would be covered in general business, and they're sold that way. And so we've got 3 editions: small business, advanced, and enterprise. And really the only difference between those is just what how much of it, how much you can do in units work at time, because the software is identical across the board. In fact, we only have one code base, and that one code base has all of this stuff in it. It's just that it's your license that you when you subscribe, either as a private cloud subscriber or a SaaS subscriber, it's your license that turns these things on. And so there is only one source base, and when we upgrade, that's the only source base we upgrade. So right out of the gate, we're very simple and very comprehensive in that sense. But when I say business software, I'm talking about this top tier. And now every one of those solutions up there needs security. Every one of those solutions up there needs workflow. Every one of those solutions needs access to a mobile device. Every one of those solutions needs localization. You get my drift. There's lots of functionality, that what I call horizontal functionality, that a lot of these verticalized focused solutions need. That is very common. And that's what the platform is all about. It's providing those fundamental horizontal business functionalities or capabilities, so that you then can just focus on the domain that you're trying to work on. A good example is 12 years ago, a company took us on as a platform company in the cloud, and their name was Jazz Systems out of Ohio. And they wrote a manufacturing solution on top of Acumatica. And Jazz Systems sold that for almost 8 years, until a few years ago, Acumatica decided, you know what, we want that capability, we're going to buy that company. And so we acquired Jazz Systems, and that is our manufacturing edition. And it was natively already written on the platform, so it was a no-brainer to bring it in. And they were already taking advantage of the platform horizontal functions. So there was very little that they had to do to be incorporated into the overall product. And that's true for many of the other editions that you see up there. They've been added over time, but we're either done by a third party, or we did them as a test case, as a offering, and we didn't have to rewrite a bunch of stuff at the platform area because it was already there. So we have teams, developer teams, that are just focused on platform, and we have developer teams that are focused on those domains of expertise or verticalizations that you see in the top level. So that's one of the things the platform provides, is it provides business services to business applications, services that all business applications need. And so we write it once and then use it many times in the top layer. Now, one of the other things this platform that is very important to understand is that it also abstracts the lower layer, which we call the technology layer. So down in the technology layer, you see a database box, a cloud box, and a developer box. First and foremost, the platform doesn't dictate what database to use. We don't care. We emit and consume T-SQL, which is a standard protocol for relational databases to use to communicate to clients. And so basically the platform is a database client to whatever relational database you want to put underneath us. Right now, we fully support SQL Server and MySQL, which runs in Linux, by the way, and so does SQL Server nowadays. So we don't even need a Windows environment for the database environment. And then if you want to use Redis or Aurora and AWS or Azure SQL and in the Azure, if you're a private cloud subscriber, go for it. Those that's a very important thing that distinguishes us in the industry. We don't tell you what database to use. We would recommend using ones that have been tried and have been proven in the industry, but we're not telling you what to do. Whereas our key competitor right now, it gives you only one choice, and it's the choice of the company that owns them. So there's a big difference there. And so if, let's say MySQL takes off in the open standards bodies and open software communities as being premier, well, then we can move, our customers might want to move over there, or maybe Microsoft continues to make SQL Server a top competitor. We let the powers that be decide that. We're not obliged to pick either one of those. That goes the same for the cloud. We can run ourselves on premise, if you want to, and create a very private cloud. In other words, you can have your own hardware, or we can run it. You can run us in any of the cloud architectures that are out there that support a Windows VM. So Azure, Amazon, DigitalOcean, Google, Oracle. You know, some of these VMware clouds that are out there. You pick the cloud you want to go to, and we'll run in it, as long as there's a Windows capable VM. And because we don't really use much of Windows at all, other than the integrated Internet Information Service, which is the web server, we don't care what version of Windows you're on. So, we go back 10 years as far as Windows support. And actually, that's the same with the database. One of the reasons we don't care what database you are is because we don't use store procedures or views or triggers. We just use the straight out indexes and constrained indexes and tables, columns, and keys. And in fact, we don't really require a definition in the database of primary foreign key relationships. We do that all in the software. So that's the reason we can abstract the database so readily. And the cloud, we don't use anything specific out of any of the cloud technologies. So again, if they can support a Windows VM today, then we are very happy and we'll run in it. And then development tools. Right now, about half of what we do is open standards and the other half is Microsoft based. That's about to change this actual calendar year as we move towards a new UI mechanism that is 100% open standards. And it's a JavaScript-based UI framework. Now, you might think, well, that must mean there's going to be a juxtaposition for users. No, we have made it very, very much a top priority to not be disruptive in any of our upgrades. So what you're going to see in this new UI is what you saw yesterday in the previous version. It looks the same. It works the same. It's just now it's a lot faster, a lot snappier, a lot more responsive than the previous, because the previous was doing round trips to the server with HTML pages. Now you're running a JavaScript application on the browser and just doing REST open API calls back to the server. So very different architecture underneath, but we can get away with that because of the platform. The platform allows us to put different UI mechanisms in there. And we've already done this once. When the company started off in 2008, the primary technology Microsoft had to offer in .NET Framework was Windows Forms. Well, we left Windows Forms and went to Web Forms, which is also part of the framework, back in 2017. And we did so, and there was no disruption. We allowed people to stay on the old UI if they wanted to, or they could move to the new UI. And we gave them over a period of 2 years in order to make, a final decision to stay on the newer one. So we're very focused on being non-disruptive as we make these changes. But nonetheless, the key point is we can make these changes because of the platform. We can slip out .NET Framework and put in .NET Core. We can continue to use C#, which is an industry standard, open standard. We're not going to use ASP.NET or ASP.NET Core anymore. No, we're going to go to Aurelia, which is a JavaScript framework. We're going to go to Node.js and TypeScript. And so we're going to create a single page architecture application, which is the modern approach for doing web apps. Most of what Google or Twitter or Facebook does now is an SPA approach, as an example. And then last but not least, because we want to make deployment and we want to make the software development cycle much more effective and more efficient, we're also going to start containerizing ourselves so that we can use Docker. And once we're fully in Docker, you can run us on any operating system. It doesn't matter if it's Windows or not. So a lot of things we're doing in the technology area, but the reason we can interchange or swap out, swap in technologies is because the business applications on top are insulated from all of that by the platform underneath. And the platform is insulated because in most cases it's self-sufficient. It doesn't require anything out of the technology layer that's unique to any particular implementation or version. So with our approach, there's no version lock-in, there's no vendor lock-in, and we're able to stay on the technology treadmill right up to the bleeding edge, if you will, as it makes sense in this area. So it's real important to understand that the platform itself gives us these capabilities. It also allows us the capabilities to talk to multiple devices because all we need is a modern browser or open APIs. And so when it comes to writing a mobile app, well, you can write a mobile app however you want, or you can use our mobile app. Our mobile app runs on Android as well as iOS. If you want to run a modern browser in the mobile device, like Safari or in Android's case, maybe Mozilla or Firefox or something like that, or Chrome, fine. We don't dictate even what kind of browser you use or what type of device you use. We're device independent because all we need is something that has a browser on it or is able to speak open APIs. That's why you see the Amazon Echo device there or the Apple Watch. Those things support open APIs, and so we're able to work with those as well. So anything that has the ability to do REST APIs or legacy-wise SOAP APIs, we can talk to it. And if you want to use read-only API, namely OData, we support both version 3 and 4. So we're very much in the area of open APIs, very much focused on being able to talk to anything. And to take that one more step further, we not only support REST open APIs, but we support all kinds of artifacts that come with that create enablements in certain ways. For instance, back in 2008, SOAP was actually the only real protocol available over the net. REST wasn't even invented yet. That didn't come out until Jeffrey did his PhD dissertation on representative state transport, which is what REST stands for, in 2010. But after 2010, the Swagger IO group got together, and they basically got together to standardize the usage of what we know today as REST. And they renamed themselves in 2015 as Open API. So the Open API committee, which we've been a part of since the beginning, is where all of these standards come out of. But we continue to support SOAP because some customers are still using it. They want to use the screen contract-based APIs that come with it for the screen, basically like screen scraping, programmatic screen scraping. But we do also have web endpoints that are contracted. So if you want to write an application against our contracted API set, you can be guaranteed almost 5 years of support for those contracts before there's any issues. And 5 years in this industry is a lifetime or two. So it's really important to understand that we have these contract-based APIs, and those APIs basically expose every data endpoint that's in the system. So there's no data that's obfuscated or unavailable by the network. You can get to it all. One very straightforward way of getting a lot of that data is using the OData protocol. And if you're using it for business intelligence, or you want to pull down data into Excel, or wherever your OData client is, we support both V3, which works against what we call our generic inquiries, which in essence create database views, but it does it inside Acumatica. Or you can use V4, which talks directly to the data tables. And so you can pull the data straight out of the tables if you want. Of course, all of this if you've got the appropriate authorization and authentication already taken place. Speaking of which, we support OAuth 2. So if you want to use token-based security, we absolutely support that. We also support OpenID Connect now, which has been an emerging way to do, if you will, single sign-on authentication in multi-domain type of situations. We do support Active Directory, and in fact, we use it for our SaaS. But more and more organizations are shying away from Active Directory and wanting more open standard authentication servers like Okta or various other ones. And OpenID Connect is the standard that's promoting that. Well, OAuth 2 just happens to be the authentication mechanism underneath OpenID Connect. So we support all of that. We support webhooks or push notifications, and those can both be tied to business event triggers. So you literally can almost write an application without writing any code within Acumatica by just simply, making things happen around certain fields changing or certain things happening over periods of time, or regularly schedule activities in periods of time, so forth and so on. And I could go on and on. As you can see, there's many other things here, but the bottom line is we're a very open platform. We can extend ourselves very naturally into the open area because we support all these open endeavors in which to connect, whether it's push-pull or it's API read-write or API read-only, and so forth. So if you want to drill in a little bit more into that previous slide we spent some time on, again, the top orange area is all the business apps. The blue area is the platform, the light blue area. And as you can see, the blue area is kind of logically separated into two factions. There's the business services that provide services to the ERP applications. And then there's the system foundation, which basically talks to the technology. And that's basically how we manage internally what we're doing as far as the platform is concerned. Now, I've shown Visual Studio here off to the right. Of course, if you know Visual Studio, you know that it's got a free edition called Community. .NET Core, which we're moving to, is free and an open standard. And so you can also use Visual Studio Code. You could use, if you really want, there's other IDEs out there that are popular that you can use. We're not obliged to Visual Studio. It's just that there's some niceties that are in there, like some widgets that we've created for it that help customization go a long ways. But those are probably going to make their way over since they're third-party developed, the Visual Studio Code or some of the other popular platforms out there. So again, we're not obliged to any particular IDE, and all the other things that we need going forward are all open standard based. So you might ask yourself, well, how do you guys pull this off? And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually go into presentation mode. All right. So I mentioned earlier that the reason I was really attracted to this company is their architecture and how they were going about dealing with integration and customization. And one of the reasons that they can do it so elegantly is because they're using C#. And C# lends itself to being extended in very, very natural ways in the language by doing inheritance, polymorphism, object relational mapping, and so forth. And so, like I said also earlier, there's only one code stack. When we ship an upgrade, we only ship one chunk of software. There's not 5 different chunks of software or 10. There's only one Acumatica chunk of software that we put out there every 6 months. That is considered a major upgrade. And in it is already based this customization engine. It's just a native part of the xRP platform. So if you're going to want to write some capability, well, first of all, the way it works is that inside the application itself, there's 3 levels. And this is a very typical demarcation of functionality in all business applications, where there's a data layer, business logic layer, and a presentation layer. So we very much follow that. So we're an MVC application today. When we move over to the JavaScript framework, we'll be an MVVM application, as it's known. But MVC meaning the view is presentation, the controller is business logic, and the model is data access. And so out of those, we basically take out of the software a bunch of DLLs, which are dynamic link libraries that are already compiled software, along with some configuration data that's stored in XML files, like config files. And we bring those all together at runtime and create an application, which is really what you're seeing on your browser. So that's at a core what Acumatica is. Now, let's say you want to customize this. Well, the way you customize it is you add additional extensions. You add a configuration data that may go with that, as well as the actual compiled software. That compiled software is separate and apart from the blue software you see here. The blue software is what we ship. The orange is what you're creating. That orange stays separated all the time. So the way this works is you go through the customization engine, you compile and make ready your unpublished extensions, and then you publish those extensions. And when you publish it, then it makes those extensions available to be incorporated into the solution at runtime. So we bring your customizations in at runtime, and that's where then the extensions would maybe override, or using abstract classes, they would actually subsume various methods and capabilities, or extend them, or remove them. Whatever it is you're doing in your customization, but those things become a part of the reality at runtime. And so if you were then to unpublish these extensions and rerun the application, now you're just using the core software again. So this lends itself very naturally to a CI/CD kind of software development lifecycle, which is, very different from some of our competitors right now. The other thing that is really cool to understand is that when you're writing these extensions, we are very transparent with our software. All of the DLL, all of the source, if you will, are in the debug libraries, and we include those with every shipment. So if you're a developer, you can bring those libraries on, and you can actually see the source code of all of the major classes that run our application. And you can see how it is that we've actually done things, how we handled certain events, or how we talk to the data layer, and so forth and so on. So you can actually learn by example very quickly about how to extend the platform, because you can see all of it. You can't change it, it's read-only. The only way you can change it is by going through this orange customization process, but it's there for edification and for you can even set debug breakpoints in the Acumatica code just to see where things are and how they're doing. So it's very, very extensible, but it's very modular. And so, like I said earlier, you can take these things away if you want. So once those customizations are running in runtime, then the customization that you did to a screen, or the new screen you added that has a new data table underneath it, or the new business event, or the new workflow that you've done, all of those things then become available to the end user quite naturally as a part of what they think is the overall application. So that in a nutshell is how we do customizations. I had already mentioned earlier how we go about doing the data layer. I thought we could drill into that a little bit more here. But the way we abstract the data layer is through what we call data access classes. These are just C# classes that account for every physical storage column there might be in a table. And a class you can think of as a software representation of a database table. So all the columns in that table are going to be properties in the class. However, you can add other properties in the class, and we call those virtual properties because they aren't persisted in the database. So you're not just limited to what's in the database. You can actually create virtual properties as well. You can also extend that table, as I said, through the customization process. That's available to you to create new fields that are now available to existing screens or to a new screen that you want to create. The way we go about the uh, management of data is really, think of the business logic layer as a graph of two things. It's got the data model, and it's got, which is all held in a cache, and then there is the logic model, which basically handles all the eventing. Like, I've just changed a field, or I changed a row, or I want to save this entire screen, or something like that. So that logical layer basically is all in C Sharp, and is very, very easy to understand, frankly, if you are familiar with C Sharp syntax, which a lot of people in the world are, because it's a very widely used language nowadays. Uh, One of the things, though, that you'll see here is we've got a declarative entity model. Uh, Rather than being functional, the founders decided they wanted to go to more of a declarative model. It's just a different way of writing or approach to writing the software. However, I believe it reads much easier, and it is much more understandable. So we use attributes in quite a few cases to dictate, behaviors, rather than having to write functions to do that. So one way to look at that is to look at this model here. Back in 2005, C Sharp 2 came out, and it had something called LINQ in it. So basically, think of that as inline queries, logical inline queries. And those queries were to create a C Sharp syntax that basically mirrored SQL syntax that a lot of relational database programs would know, and use, SQL editors for, like SQL Server Management Studio or something like that. So LINQ is functional. It's got a procedural approach, whereas we wanted a declarative approach. So what they did was they did their own query language called Business Query Language, or BQL, which is very similar in LINQ in many ways, except that it structures the semantics much more readably. In other words, it actually reads like a select statement would in a SQL editor. The BQL declarative model is then what goes against the object model, which is really is defined by these DACs, as you can see here on the left. And so we talk to the operational capabilities through the T-SQL that we're talking to the database with, and that's what basically gives us the columns or the fields or the rows out of those tables, or gives us the capability of joining tables together, which is one of the key things about relational database, so that we can get the result sets out that we need, or put the result sets in that we need to do. So BQL is very much an invention, but if you're familiar with LINQ, it doesn't go very far from that. In fact, there was even a more simplification or more readable version created called Fluent BQL, which isn't shown on this slide. But as you can see on the right here, when you're basically parking the data into this data variable, which is right here in the middle of the screen, what you're doing is you're just doing a select statement. Select from product joined on these IDs where that is true. Well, that's a select statement. Select from like splat from this table. Select all rows from this table where this ID is equal to that ID. That's a select statement. And so the software reads very much like a select statement, but it's in C# semantics. So bottom line is that if you know C#, and and you'll know .NET if you know C#, then you're ready to go. And there are so many, the workforce out there in the world has plenty of developers available that can have these capacities. Unlike Dynamics AX, where I came from at Microsoft, where you had to find X++ programmers. Guess what? Those are hard to find. And that's true with many of the other competitors we have. If you know JavaScript, great. But if you know JavaScript and you want to work, Oracle's NetSuite, well, guess what? You're going to have to learn SuiteScript. So, it's not readily a transferable capability, whereas C#, if you know it, you just simply need to understand what class libraries we have. And again, you can actually see them all because we're transparent and make them all visible to our customers. So speaking of what we're doing to the new UI, this is what we have today. And as I mentioned earlier, we switched over to web forms, which is a part of the .NET framework. back 5 years ago. And so this is the current model we use to talk to clients. So as you can see, the browser goes through web forms over here in this orange area, whereas everything else we do is basically API based. So whether we're talking to our mobile phone app or we're talking to third parties, we're doing so with REST APIs for the mobile client and or integration. Now, what's going to change primarily is what's over here in this orange area. And so let's take a look at that. So what's going to happen now is rather than emitting XML and SOAP to the browser and using AJAX as the response, back for the callbacks, and AJAX is just an XML-based language like JavaScript might be used on a browser side, but nonetheless, we're moving to a web API for everything. So the way the browser will talk to the backend and the way the mobile client will talk to the backend is the same way. So there's no distinguishing between if you're using a browser or a mobile app or a browser on a PC or an application on a PC for that matter. We'll talk to it using web APIs. And so you can see this really greatly simplifies the overall approach, such that basically the way you talk to Acumatica is with REST protocols, with JSON payloads. And that's very much the industry standard today. So another thing to note is that the customization engine is really going to be able to do all of these things in a very straight-ordered fashion. So without having been exposed to it to date, if you haven't had that opportunity, it'd be a little hard to describe how much better it's going to be. But suffice to say that there's going to be a lot of customization you can do without writing one line of code. We're very much focused on what we call low-code, no-code approaches to that. Let's say you want to add a field to a screen. You can do that with just clicking the mouse. You want to add a business event to a screen, clicking the mouse. You want to create a data provider that talks to Salesforce or HubSpot. Well, it's already in the box, but you want to modify it, a few clicks of the mouse. So there's a lot of customization that you can do within the platform that has nothing to do with writing C# code. And we're only going to make that even more robust as we go forward. And that's what's really in this dotted line area here called customization script engine, is the ability to actually create lots of different screens or at least versions of screens with new fields on them without having to write C# code. So that's going to be very, very important. The other thing that's not really stated here cleanly, but is very important to understand, is this whole blue box is .NET Core. And because it's .NET Core, we're not obliged to run in Windows anymore. So that's one of the reasons we can move this whole thing to a Docker container. So it's real important to understand we're basically embracing new technologies as they mature and they've proven business worthy, and we can do that because we're xRP platform based. So like I said, today the mobile client uses HTTPS and REST. The web browser uses HTTPS and AJAX. Tomorrow, everything will use this top line. This bottom line goes away. So whether you're on a mobile client or on a browser, you're basically talking to the server in the same way. One of the other things that we're going to be doing, which is very powerful to platform, is working on the generic query engine. Right now, the reporting service, or this reporting engine that does printed forms, is a separate service. All of the stuff in this middle blue box is all going to become one box. Namely, it's going to be an integrated query engine that's been split into two parts. One part talks to the data layer, the other part does the UI. And it's going to be much more performant and being able to generate forms, whether they're visual or printed or PDFs or whatever you might need, EDI type things or whatever. But it's going to be much more eventful and capable than even what we have today, which is very, very capable already. You can see all the different kind of outgoes there on the top. There's OData feeds. The generic inquiries would be basically dynamic queries you're doing in your browser. there are pivot tables that are available in most screens, and there are dashboards that basically operate off of these generic inquiries and create the widgets or the visual artifacts on the dashboard. They're what drive those artifacts, the result sets from these queries. So if you want to create up your own dashboard and you know how to do generic inquiries, you're all set. If you need someone to help you with a generic inquiry, you just get that done, and then you can attach a widget to it and put it on a dashboard. Generic inquiries, well, the real key thing with them is that you need to understand where the fields are, the data is, and we make that very easy in two forms. One is there's what we call our data access class schema browser, which allows you to see every table in the product and every column that's in every one of those tables, and which ones are keys, which ones are foreign keys to other tables, and so forth. So it's basically an EDI or EDR, excuse me, of the database. It's visual. It's not graphical. The other is the fact that in every screen, if you've got the customizer role, you're able to actually hover over any of the fields on that screen, and you'll be able to find where it's stored inside of the data structure immediately. In fact, with 2 clicks, I can go straight to the code that supports that field and customize it if I want. So we make it very easy to find out where the fields are stored, how they interact with other tables. So making the whole process of creating new fields or adding new fields or adding new screens becomes very actually a very straightforward process. Now for integration, which is important, you guys, like I said, we integrate with all kinds of different things. We support standards, and so depending on what your data source is, you can come in at us using XLS files, CSV files, XML data payloads. You can come at us with SQL payloads that are either in JSON format or not. You can even do inquiry formats to create result sets that are consumable, whether in JSON format or XML. What we mean by data source is really, it's just a provider. And what the provider does is it allows you to take fields that are coming in from your data source, your data origins, and you're mapping the fields into the actual fields you want those to be mapped to inside the ERP database. And so that's all a data provider is a mapping service. And that's completely open to you to customize or create new ones if you want. And this is basically doing payloads, whether they're file imports or they're payloads that are coming over the wire. There's also what we call our scenario engine or import-export scenarios. Those scenarios then can schedule those data sources or orchestrate those data sources so that when you run a scenario, it runs across one or more data sources, pulling one or more data fields. And then you can also put that on a schedule. So if you really want to continue, like noon at every day or midnight every day, pull a bunch of data from an external system, this would be a great way to do that. By the way, those data sources, they also talk REST APIs. So that data source could be talking to a remote integration point using REST, and then you're doing the mapping this way and doing the imports that through the intermediate layer here, and then all of that gets transferred into the ERP database or pulled from it if you want to go the other way too, by the way. So because there is also export. So we make integration really just a first-class service within the product. And we don't care what format the data is coming at us or what format you want us to emit the data in, because we can do all the popular formats, even PDF, which isn't even shown here on this list. And the data source, like I said, can be file-based, it can be bulk-based, it could be API-based. And then those data sources can be orchestrated, either importing or exporting data. And all of that's coming out of this data access classes, which represent all the data that's in the ERP database. The last thing I wanted to talk about is the way you can orchestrate all this stuff and really automate. And that's also a first-class citizen within the platform. You can see here that you can use the APIs in this case or UIs. We don't care. But there is a state, and it's replace the automation word here with workflow, because that's really what we're doing now. We're calling it workflow. So it's workflow and business events. But basically, there's a state engine within the product that keeps track of states. And states could be like statuses or stages of certain things, like projects or opportunities or sales, or stages of your interaction in getting qualified leads in your CRM work, and or your marketing, doing qualified leads. It could be any of these types of states, but you can orchestrate them using our state engine. And the state engine is very visible. In other words, you can actually use which really a workflow chart diagram and create your state that way. So it visually makes sense to you rather than doing it textually, which is also available. Well, one of the things that is real important to understand is that this state engine works against the data. And so there's always some relationship, the state's coming out of some business object. And whatever that state that business object in, you can react to changes in that state in multiple ways. You can, based on the data, cause something to happen, which is a push, or you can react to something that's happened, which is an event. So we allow these business objects using the state diagram to become programmable. And basically, that's the way to look at it. And so and then with these push notifications or business events, you can basically handle them in multiplicity of ways. You can cause an import-export scenario engine to kick in and pull data from a remote data source using APIs. You could actually have an event handler that actually wakes up a different part of the system to handle the situation that has arisen. Or you can have an event handler that pops up dialog boxes on the end user's screen, letting them know that something needs attention or something has completed, whatever it is that you see fit that you want to do. But basically, because of this engine and the previous 2 slides I've shown you, you literally can write your own application without writing any code whatsoever. So you can write your data handler, you can write your business logic, which is this, and you can present it in either a REST API or a XML format so that you can consume it on a data browser. So there's really very little UI work you have to do. There's really just orchestrating the logic in the events and workflow area, and there's deciding what data you need in order to suffice, the objective of the application that you've set out to write. So hopefully this really makes clear what the xRP platform is all about. It's really there to support business applications and the creation of them as well as the use of them, and it's there to insulate the users or the developers or users from the technology layer, as I was pointing out earlier in this slide here. So hopefully you understand what I mean when I say that we do these functions like workflow and APIs, customization, analytics, which is dashboard or reports, mobile framework, object relational mapping, multi-tenancy. That's another capability we didn't even touch on, but with multi-tenant being a native part of the platform, therefore a native part of our data store, you can have one instance of the web service running that supports multiple companies, or have one that has one company but supports multiple branches. And what we do at the data layer is we keep the records that are associated with that company and or branch, or both. We keep them unique to those because we have fields that are system level fields that are maintained by the system that keeps track of that stuff. And so we know there's only one table that has sales orders in it. But in that table, there could be records for 19 different branches. And we know which sales order belongs to which branch because of a special set of columns we put inside. We also put audit fields in every record so that we know when they were created, when they were touched, when they were last modified. We have a timestamp on every record so that we can have optimistic concurrence, with data transactions into the database and have, the utmost of data integrity. And then last but not least, every record has a note ID reference, so you can attach anything you want to any record within the product. Most likely you'll be attaching, images or PDFs or text files or voice files or whatever it is. But basically the mechanism lends itself to being, just oblivious to the data type that you want to attach. And so that's all built into the platform. So being able to, do really sophisticated document stuff or being able to do localization is very straightforward for us, because localization, the entire platform was built to be localizable. And that's just a C# class mechanism that we take full advantage of.